Alright, so continuing, thyroxine and triiodothyronine, they're bound to plasma proteins. I've already told you previously that thyroid hormones, they're never free. Whenever they are stored in the thyroid gland, in these follicular cells, and in the follicular cells, where exactly they're stored in the colloid, right? So in the colloid, they are bound to the thyroglobulin, and wherever they release into the blood, they do not roam around freely in the bloodstream. Instead, they're bound to this plasma protein called thyroxine binding globulin, or also you have another plasma protein which is albumin or thyroxine binding thyroxine binding prealbumin. So these are the three plasma proteins. Plasma proteins are made in liver, they're synthesized in liver. So these plasma proteins, they bind and store the thyroid hormone. So they're never free, they never roam around freely. And there's high affinity of plasma binding proteins for the thyroid hormone. So they have high affinity, and especially for T4. So T4 has very high affinity. That's why it's slower to be released, and after almost 6 days, after every 6 days, T4 is released. Whereas T3, which is triiodothyronine, it has lower affinity, so it's very weakly bound. That's why it's released after every day. So basically, after 1 day gap, T3 is released. Um, Also, again, very important for you to understand that thyroxine, this one, which has a greater affinity, it has a latent period of 2 to 3 days. What does a latent period mean? Latent period means that when does it first show any changes in the metabolic activity. So with the help of this graph, you'll be able to understand that we're talking about thyroxine, which is T4. So once it is first injected, it starts showing the first changes in the metabolism after 2 to 3 days, and then it reaches its maximum activity at around 10 to 12 days, and then its half-life gets achieved by 15 days, and that's when it starts declining. So around after 15 days it starts declining. And so this means it has it has a delayed latent period, right? Whereas triiodothyronine, its latent period is 6 to 12 hours. So this is comparatively faster acting. Why? Because it has a weaker affinity, right? So it has a weaker affinity. That's why it's very weakly bound and it is easy to release. So it initially starts showing changes in metabolic rate after 6 to 12 hours, and it reaches the maximum activity after 2 to 3 days. It reaches the maximum activity. Most of the latency and the prolonged period of action of these hormones are probably caused by their binding with the proteins both in the plasma and in the tissue cells, followed by their slow release. And they're also slow to release, right? That's the reason that there is a delayed latent period. Now, when you talk about the physiological functions of the thyroid hormones, so what are the cellular, or what is the mechanism of action of thyroid hormone? For that, it's important to refer to this diagram. So generally, the thyroid hormones, once they enter the cell, they go into the nucleus because their receptors are right inside the nucleus, and they bind to the receptor and they cause changes in the transcription. So they activate nuclear transcription of the gene. So directly they alter the nuclear transcription of the gene, and there'll be generalized increase in functional activity throughout the body because they're going to produce this changes in the gene transcription is going to produce a lot of proteins. Those proteins, enzymes, cells, cellular proteins, or channels or transporters or whatsoever, they're going to increase the generalized activity throughout the body. Now, this thyroid hormone is an intracellular, the thyroid hormone receptor is an intracellular receptor, and it has high affinity for triiodothyronine. That's the reason triiodothyronine is more potent. Now, the thyroid hormone receptor, it forms a heterodimer with this retinoid X receptor, and these two, they form a heterodimer specifically at this point in DNA, which is known as thyroid response element. So you have a thyroid hormone receptor, and it forms a heterodimer with a retinoid X receptor. So retinoid X receptor, thyroid hormone receptor, they form a heterodimer, and they attach to this position in DNA called thyroid hormone response element. This is going to initiate the transcription process, and there'll be a lot of different RNAs which are produced. These different RNAs which are produced, These are going to, in another within another few minutes or hours, they're going to cause RNA translation on the cytoplasmic ribosome, because obviously mRNA is going to come out into the cytoplasm. There'll be cytoplasmic ribosomes where a lot of new intracellular proteins will be produced, at least up to a few hundreds of them. And whatever changes that occur in the body as the result of thyroid hormone functioning, it is basically because of the subsequent enzymatic changes or other functions of these new proteins, because there are a lot of new proteins which are produced. So because of the changes of those proteins, the entire basal metabolic rate gets increased. And this was a genomic effect because it was directly changing the transcription with reference to the DNA. But there are also some non-genomic cellular effects, which means it has nothing to do with the gene transcription or translation. And this is particularly in the cells of the heart, pituitary, adipose, and in the regions of the plasma membrane, cytoplasm, and mitochondria. What happens is that there is regulation of ion channels, and there's increase or decrease in oxidative phosphorylation, and there's activation of the secondary messenger system. And thyroid hormones, they increase cellular metabolic rate by at least 60, oh my god, 60 to 100%. So that's a very drastic increase in the basal metabolic rate. So at least 60 to 100% of the metabolic rate gets increased by thyroid hormone secretion. And um, the rate of when this basal metabolic rate has increased, this means that the rate of utilization of food for energy is increased, then the rate of protein synthesis, the anabolism of protein is increased, then increase is there in the rate of protein catabolism, there's increase in the growth of the young people, and there's also increase in the mental processes. People will be thinking a lot more, and they can also be anxious. They'll also have other health conditions. Now, thyroid hormone, what does it do? It increases the number of mitochondria. So very important for you to understand. The thyroid hormone, it directly increases the number of mitochondria, either by increasing their number, either by increasing their cell membrane, the surface area that is provided by the cell membrane, or either by increasing the activity of the mitochondria or increasing the sodium potassium ATPase pump. This means there'll be greater formation of ATP, and this is going to energize the cellular function. And thyroid hormones, so particularly they increase the activity of sodium potassium ATPase pumps. That's something you need to know. And there'll be increased ATP production. Whenever ATP production increases, this means there'll be increased heat in the body. So heat production will increase. That's the reason there's increased metabolic rate. Thyroid hormone also causes cell membranes of most cells to become leaky to sodium. So cells will become leaky to sodium. So if there's sodium potassium ATPase, this means free sodium out, to potassium in. So there'll be excessively very high sodium out because of excessive functioning of the sodium potassium ATPase pump. And there's such a great concentration of sodium outside. So it is imperative that there'll be a leakiness of sodium, and sodium will flow inside. And it can cause excitability, it can cause increased depolarization and all of that. Now, what does thyroid hormone have? How does it have an effect on the growth? So thyroid hormone, under experimental conditions, it was noticed that it caused metamorphic change of tadpole into frog. So the frog, the tadpole was given thyroid hormone and it eventually converted to frog. So it basically has a very important role in the growth and development. And also, when you talk about the fetal brain, so in the fetal life, thyroid hormone is very important because it helps with the development of the brain, and also not just in the fetal life, but also in the postnatal life. Once the baby is there in the world, thyroid hormone, it causes the maturation and growth of the brain further. If there is decrease of thyroid hormones, it can result in thyroid hormone. This can result in retardation and other mental conditions. So it's very important that those babies who are born without a thyroid gland, it's essential to give them thyroid therapy. Now, moving forward, thyroid hormone has a lot of effects on the different metabolisms. So let me change the color of the pen. If you talk about the carbohydrate metabolism, so what are the effects? So, carbohydrate metabolism. So, in general, thyroid hormone is capable of increasing all of the aspects of every metabolism. So, even it stimulates every aspect of carbohydrate metabolism. It increases the glucose uptake. So glucose is taken up by the cells. It also increases the glycolysis. So glucose is also broken down. It also increases gluconeogenesis. Glucose is also being produced. So it's just going crazy. This hormone is going crazy and it's increasing every aspect of the carbohydrate metabolism, whether it is the breakdown of glucose, whether it is the formation of glucose, whether it's the uptake of glucose, whatsoever. It's going to increase all of that. It's also going to increase the absorption from the GIT tract. It's also going to increase the insulin secretion so that there can be more and more glucose uptake. So overall, there's increase in cellular. And why does this happen? This happens because there is increase in the cellular enzymes. So because cellular enzymes are increasing, so they're increasing for all of these reactions. So every aspect of the carbohydrate metabolism will be increased. When you talk about the fat metabolism, so what happens is that again, every aspect of the fat metabolism is also enhanced by thyroid hormone. Lipids are they're metabolized rapidly, sorry, they're mobilized rapidly, which means that um, from the adipose tissue, the fat stores are decreased and they are they're freely floating in the blood. So mobilization of lipids from adipose tissue, this means that there'll be free fatty acid concentration, there'll be increased free fatty acid concentration in the blood because whenever adipose tissue in the adipose tissue, whenever the lipids are stored, they're stored in the form of tags, right? And these tags, if they are broken down again into free fatty acid and glycerol, so that will be floating in the blood. So there'll be increased free fatty acid concentration in the plasma, and if there's a lot of free fatty acids, what will happen? There'll be beta oxidation in the mitochondria and there'll be increased ketone production. So for fat metabolism, you can just learn that increased lipids are mobilized and there'll be increased free fatty acid concentration in the blood. And effect on plasma and liver fats. What about the plasma and liver fats? So even though there's increased free fatty acid, but there'll be decreased concentration of cholesterol and lipids. So even though fatty acids are increasing, but when you talk about phospholipids, when you talk about phospholipids and when you talk about cholesterol, they decrease because of um, thyroid hormone. So cholesterol and phospholipids they decrease. You have to learn it as it is. And so it's important for you to understand that if there is hypothyroidism in any situation, if there's hypothyroidism, what will happen? In decreased thyroid secretion, this is going to increase cholesterol and it's also going to increase the phospholipids and it's also going to increase triglyceride, right? It's also going to increase the triglyceride because fatty acids will be converted back to tags and there'll be increased tags. When there is so much tags and all of cholesterol and phospholipid, there'll be excessive deposition of fat in the liver, as well as because of the increased circulation of plasma cholesterol. So, in prolonged hypothyroidism, there'll be chances to develop atherosclerosis because there'll be a lot of cholesterol. So, this is the fat metabolism in short. What will happen? Lipids will be metabolized, there'll be free fatty acid flowing, so there'll be increased free fatty acid concentration in the plasma because these tags are mobilized and they're converted to free fatty acid and there'll be beta oxidation. But the cholesterol and phospholipids will be low. So free fatty acid will be high, cholesterol and phospholipid will be low. But in hypothyroidism, it will be quite the opposite, and because of increased cholesterol, atherosclerosis can develop. One of the mechanisms by which thyroid hormone decreases plasma concentration is to increase significantly the cholesterol secretion in the bile. So this bile is secreted in this cholesterol is secreted in the bile and it is consequently lost in the feces. So this is the mechanism by which cholesterol is decreased. And why is it decrease in bile? Because there's increased motility of the GIT tract, which causes a lot of release of bile, and that's the reason cholesterol is low. Um, A possible mechanism for the increased cholesterol secretion in thyroid hormone is that thyroid hormone induces increased number of low-density lipoprotein receptors in the liver cells, leading to rapid removal of low-density lipoproteins from the plasma by the liver and subsequent secretion of cholesterol and these lipoproteins by the liver. Now, there's also increased requirement for vitamins. What does this mean? This means that there are a lot of, since everything in the body is increasing, there are a lot of enzymes that are increasing, there are a lot of transport proteins that are increasing, but primarily let's refer to enzymes because there are a lot of enzymes increasing. So vitamins will also increase because all of the many of these enzymes have need coenzymes and many of those coenzymes need vitamins, right? So thyroid hormone increases the quantity of many of the bodily enzymes, and because vitamins are essential parts of some of these enzymes and coenzymes, so it's almost imperative to also increase vitamins in the same manner as the excess of thyroid. And there's excessive basal metabolic rate. For that, it's important to refer to this diagram. Extreme amounts of hormones are required to cause high basal metabolic rates. So if the metabolic, see, if the thyroid hormone is increasing, it's fine. But extreme thyroid hormone, for example, if it goes up to 100, so this is going to cause very excessive increase in the basal metabolic rate. So if there's a minor increase in thyroid hormone, it's fine. But if thyroid hormone increases greatly, that will, this is normal level. But if thyroid hormone increases greatly, then you'll need, that's when the basal metabolic rate will be altered. Now, now talking about the body weight. The body weight decreases because basal metabolic rate increases. Because of increased basal metabolic rate, the body weight is going to decrease. So thyroid hormone is going to decrease uh, the body weight. But this is not always the case because of thyroid hormone, even the appetite increases. So appetite increases, this means the person is um, prone to consuming a lot more food. So this is going to balance out the decrease in the body weight. So it will be counterbalance. And the rest of the changes we'll discuss in the next video.